UFC 229 was supposed to be the biggest day in MMA history, biggest day in UFC history, biggest fight in UFC history. And I don't know if it was, but it's definitely going to be one of the most memorable ones. Welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. This is the UFC 229 post-fight show right here on MMAfighting.com. I am joined, of course, by Sean El-Shadi and Chuck Mindenhall. Well, boys, never a dull moment, I guess. I already did the post-fight show on my own channel, but forget all that for just a second because I got some evolving views about this. As each minute passes, I've got a bunch of different ideas. Okay, so here's the facts as we know them. Conor McGregor was submitted in the fourth round, 3:03, I believe, is the frame time, via rear naked choke or some kind of jaw crank by Khabib Nurmagomedov. We'll come back to all the fight because, by the way, we do have to talk about that at some point.
That happened.
It did, it did happen. That's right. But we have to talk about the melee first. Khabib Nurmagomedov, as we could tell, right, jumps out of the cage after he and Dylan Dennis have words. Of course, the teammate of Conor McGregor. Khabib is about that life, apparently. Jumps right out the cage. They go after it. Then Zubaira Tugugov jumps in and some other unidentified fellows. Conor's being attacked inside the cage. Eventually, both are escorted. Bruce Buffer reads the cards when no one's in the cage at all. We didn't speak to Conor. We did speak to Dana. And what would you say? Khabib had a short statement. Sean, I'll go to you first. The big takeaway from the melee is what?
Wow. I mean, I don't know. I feel like we're still. I mean, this happened maybe an hour or two ago at this point, and it's still, we're unpacking it. It's still so strange. I'm still a little stunned. I mean, we're sitting here poring over cell phone video, like it's the Zapruder film, trying to piece together just what happened. I mean, Chuck Mindenhall and I, we were on the ground floor of the arena, and when this happened, nobody had any idea what was going on. Chaos just ensued all of a sudden, and it was just a big mob inside the arena, and all of a sudden, the arena basically felt like it was going to explode. I mean, it was a very weird sight. It was almost a little scary just for like a half a second because you didn't know how this was going to play out. It felt like things were going to start raining down, more or less. Like, I think if this was 2 years ago, where if this was 189 or 194, when a lot of the Irish were coming, I don't feel like the Irish really came out for this one, but if all of the Irish came out for this one, it felt like really it would have become an explosive scene with just beer flying everywhere and a lot of stuff going on. But ultimately, the ultimate thing, man, I mean, this was a night billed as the biggest night in UFC history, right? The biggest fight in UFC history. Probably it's going to break a lot of records. More eyes were watching this than I think any UFC anything that we've ever seen in the history of the sport. And what they saw was that. It was our version of the Malice in the Palace. I know, I just personally speaking, anecdotally, I had lots of people from various forms of the world in different niches hitting me up, like retweeting my stuff and hitting me up and just generally being interested in this in ways that our sport never really experiences. I don't think that's a good look for the sport ultimately, especially in places outside of America, right? Because in America, mixed martial arts is what it is. People accept it. There are still a lot of countries where this is something that's evolving, where people are trying to get rid of the stigma, that this is a very, dangerous, silly sport. And when they see something like this, I feel like that will validate maybe some of those stigmas.
Chuck, what's the major takeaway here? I asked him. Certainly not a good thing by itself for the sport. Are we hand-wringing here? We all thought the bus incident would be terrible, and it made everyone a bunch of money. So what's the deal here?
See, that's the tricky part. You go into a fight that's this big, right? Colossally big, maybe historically big. So what does that do? We always get to an event like this, and there's actually hysteria that's in the air. It's just in the air. We know by the end of a fight, so many directions will have shifted. We'll see where everything lands. So as it's happening, you're still wrapping your mind around Conor McGregor tapping out. What does this mean? It's the newest thing. There was a weird moment, like a surge of strange energy at that moment, I will say, but that's not uncommon for a guy like that who's an icon within the game for that to kind of collectively happen. That definitely existed. But as the thing started happening, you could feel a surge from behind us on press row, and you're thinking like, uh-oh, is this about to become something disastrous? Because you see everybody kind of going in, and you realize that people are just filming it. They're just standing over you filming it, and they're getting close to you, and all of that stuff. So there's all of this happening at once, which is just, it's like the normal hysteria was compounded by 10. Now, within that same hysteria, you wonder, like, what is going to happen with this thing? The initial reaction is disgusting and all these things, and it is, but it's also... When the facts all start to come out and you start to hear Khabib, he makes his apology, you start to realize he's talking about loyalty. You know that he was sitting on all this seething, all the seething stuff in him that he kind of downplayed, I think, through the process. and you realize how deep this stuff goes, and his team, and then you go to Conor McGregor and you realize how deep this stuff goes. It's a different eye-opening thing, and I'm not necessarily sure. I think it'll take a little bit of time for it to all come back out, but I'm not so sure it's going to be the black eye on the sport. I know there was a lot of there was a ton of
moaning and gnashing of teeth.
But I think a lot of times that's just part of the social media, uprising in a night like this. We'll see. I'm not trying to downplay it by any means, but I certainly don't. It's not a slam dunk that this is going to be a black eye. I know I can understand everybody being like, "Hey, this isn't what mixed martial arts is," but at the same time, I'm like, somewhat it is what mixed martial arts is.
Hey, Gus Johnson, nice to see you again. Boy, you've changed. Look, there's a couple of thoughts I had about this, boys. I wonder what you think. The first one is, isn't it crazy that look. Khabib and Conor were on a collision course no matter what. We all kind of knew that. But what's interesting is this fight has been bookended by violence outside the cage by one team, translated to violence outside the cage by another team. That's really how this rivalry got kick-started and ultimately ended here. I'm hoping this is the end of it tonight. That's a little weird, and I don't know that that's all that great, even if it makes people some money. Like, people use money making as the defining value in MMA, and it's a pretty predominant one, but we have to be incredibly shallow creatures to think that that's the most important thing that we could possibly do. And Khabib did make a good point. Man, look, let's be real about this. Khabib is from a part of the world. He just put up a post on Instagram before he went live to record here, saying that, look, this is a matter of honor. He said it on Instagram. He's from a part of the world where they don't play those games. Yeah. And here you have a guy in Conor McGregor saying, or jumping into the Bellator cage, no punishment. His team, look, Dylan Dennis got kicked out of Marcelo Garcia's for just being weird on Instagram. They did nothing at SBG. He got in no trouble for jumping into that cage. The courts did about what the courts were going to do. He had no punishment by the UFC. He comes out and says all these incredibly disparaging things, and this guy's from a part of the world where they have this sort of honor society. What did we think was going to happen here? So, like, how do you attribute, and how do you rather assign blame?
That's a good question. I think that's one we're going to be talking about probably for the next week or so, right? A couple weeks. At this point, it's still too early. I mean, again, we're still like piecing this together. My initial reaction was similar to Chuck's, where in the moment you're like, oh man, this is a really dark day for the sport. And then the more we get away from it, the more kind of distance we get from it. It's just, I feel like this is the sport. This is the fight game.
This is not the sport, though, is it?
It is in a way, though, man. This was very boxing, right? Like, these type of scenes have happened in boxing. I don't know if it's the sport just in terms of mixed martial arts, but it is the fight game. Combat sports in general has these type of scenes throughout its history. It's very bizarre, and when you just talk about assigning blame, I think you could go all sorts of routes, because like you said, this starts with violence and it ends with violence. You could even go farther back than that, because I would assume you're talking about the bus attack, but the bus attack was preceded by, or before that, it was Khabib Nurmagomedov,
which I would count as violence too. I mean, he did put his hands on him, right?
Yeah,
so.
Cornering Artem with 20 of his teammates and slapping Artem. So this is just a continuation and an escalation. That's really what it keeps. It's a continual escalation of sort of this rivalry. I mean, it is what it is, but I feel like it's far from over, to be honest.
Who gets the blame here, very quickly?
Well, I mean, it's hard to blame the UFC, because honestly, I did notice how many police officers were around. They did every precaution in the lead up to this fight to keep them separated. I think there was a general air of, hey, something crazy might happen if we let these guys do it, because these guys, I think, ultimately are those types of competitors, and they are that tied into their countries, and they are that tied into their teams. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. Honestly, it's going to probably. You could slice this any way you want, but I find the most ironic one.
I think everyone's got a bit of blame to shoulder here.
And you could go back to any piece of this rivalry and say that that's the catalyst. If you just look at tonight, it's interesting. Just an interesting aside that a Bellator fighter was the one who came in and ruined the UFC's big night. That's one angle, but that's just one of a million. You know what I'm saying? That's just it's just one of those things that I think you look at it over time, and I think you could probably go to Khabib Nurmagomedov carrying a big load of this blame. I mean, come on. He's the professional. But again, this is a guy, and I think he's proven it. He's a fairly cold dude, man. I mean, and he's like, and when he goes up and he's apologizing and inform a statement, you're just like, this is a little bit of a darker fellow than we used to laugh at him and just being a stoic and all that. But then you realize how deep it goes. And it's just, got to realize all this stuff. You know what I mean?
And not just him, his teammates. They all seem to be cut from the same cloth, you were going to say?
Yeah, I will add, though, I mean, at that point, he's already won, right? Like, you beat Conor. You choked him out exactly in the way you could, or in the way you said you would, the way you promised. You're the winner at that point. You can just get on the mic and crap on these guys. You can really do whatever you want. That escalation felt incredibly unnecessary. And I know what we're talking about just in terms of the honor system and just the way that that culture is very different from ours. But again, that's your moment, man. You won. You can just to carry that into the sunset. You're forever the guy that beat Conor in that way. And in a way, I almost feel like, I don't know how to phrase this correctly, but I almost feel like Conor doesn't come out of this looking as, I don't know that his legacy takes as big of a hit in a weird way where like now we're just focusing on the brawl instead of Conor losing. And that's all we would be talking about is like, what does this do for Conor's legacy? And now it's like a part of a bigger picture, whereas it didn't need to be.
I just add as well, to me, when Khabib got up here, I half sympathize. Yeah. Like the guy, look, man, Conor McGregor got there and said his manager was on a plane at 9/11 and got pulled off. By the way, I'm told, even by the guy who's been reporting these stories, Mike Russell, that Conor got the facts wrong. So that story is not even true by the guy who is hammering these stories home more than anybody else. Like, if you say these kinds of things, dude, tensions are going to boil over, especially when all the institutions that are supposed to do something about outrageous behavior do nothing. Yeah. There's going to be blowback. On the other hand, Khabib gets up here and he says, you can't talk about my religion, you can't talk about my family. Well, I understand that it's disrespectful and terrible. You kind of can.
You definitely can.
You kind of can. It's called freedom of speech. You actually can say whatever you want that's not libelous or...
This is a sport that leads to the flagpole anyway. I mean, he's going in there to do him bodily harm. It's already a fight. Now, that's usually the thing when we're talking about rivals in other sports is what's the worst that happened? They get into a fight. He's actually going in there and he was able to smash him. He dictated that fight. He put good punishment on him. You know what I mean? I think this is just so personal, you know what I mean? And that it just shows you how personal these things can get, especially in a hugely scrutinized fight where guys are, where that type of personal thing maybe is starting to play into levels of humiliation, things like that. Guys can harbor that kind of thing, and I think that's something like the Daniel Cormier John Jones thing. You think about that, and you always wonder, like when in the lobby of what was it, the MGM Grand when they got in the brawl. How does this happen? Well, they just hate each other in that moment. It's like blinding, to them. And I feel like that we saw that exactly in this. And if you've ever been in a fight or just in a fit of rage or something, if you ever go back, it kind of happens like that. You know what I mean? I don't think there's too much thought process in it because it's pretty instantaneous.
We have to do something. We have to talk about this fight on some level. Yes, there was a main event that happened.
Yeah, it did happen at one point.
And by the way, it was pretty great.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about it. 4-round, I'd say mostly domination. Third round, of course, I gave that to Conor McGregor.
Agreed, yeah.
I thought you could make an argument. It kind of looked to me like Khabib took a round off, maybe. But whatever. Conor was coming to life a little bit. He was, I think, showing some pretty good takedown defense against the cage. Forget all the stuff that happened afterwards if you can for just a moment. What about the fight? This to me was like, there's not a guy in this weight class. Maybe Tony Ferguson's the guy, but they've lined up 27 Bamas, and 27 Bamas have gotten crushed by this guy. Khabib Nurmagomedov is pretty goddamn incredible.
I mean, I think he's going to go down as all-time lightweight. It's probably a little too early to say he's, the best or, whatever kind of range you want to put in, but it feels as though he is an unstoppable force. And, I still really would like to see the Tony Ferguson fight. In my opinion, I've said this a long time, I think Tony Ferguson is that guy. I think he's the number one guy. But Khabib Nurmagomedov was as impressive as advertised, as impressive as, coming into this, we felt like there was one or two things that were going to happen, right? He was going to knock out Conor, or he was just going to thoroughly dominate him. And that's really what happened. He thoroughly dominated Conor from the first 30 seconds when he got that first takedown, and he just would not let go. And eventually, he slowly worked his way there. You could tell it was just like, oh man, this is going to just keep happening.
And how about the fact that he beats him at Conor's own game? In the second round, he drops him with a punch, and that was shades of Chael Sonnen downing Silva in that fight at UFC 117. Just a shocking sort of development, right? You're like, that's not supposed to happen. He actually caught him a couple of times with nice punches. I'm not going to say he's a better striker, but he showed up in all forms, and it just shows you the guy is better than we probably give him credit for on his feet, and I think he's just the best we've probably seen when it comes to the grappling. So total domination, and I do tend to agree with you a little bit. It did not look like he was going full force in that in the third round.
Hard to say. He could have been tired. It's just he came back.
He came back so strong in the fourth that it kind of had that look.
You know what occurred to me when I was thinking about, especially with the melee that happened afterwards, Sean? I actually think Conor did get in his head pretty clearly, right? Like, look at the rage he had. Here's the problem for Conor. It made Khabib better.
Backfired.
Right. It blew up in his face big time. It rattled Jose. I think at the moment certainly rattled even an experienced veteran like Eddie Alvarez. Boy, it lit a fire under one Khabib Nurmagomedov. Would you agree with my assessment there?
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like we kind of now, in retrospect, a lot of what we saw from him this week really just fits into that, right? Because we saw it from the beginning where he was just stone cold the entire week, focused, dead laser on. Like even at the press conference, he wasn't having it. He's playing his own game. He's not playing Conor's game. And out there, I mean, he just looked incredibly focused. And I agree with you. I mean, at some point, it almost looked like he was trying to prove a point. And to his corner's detriment, it felt like his corner was urging him on to, play his own game. But one thing that strikes me now, as we get more distance from this, Conor McGregor, obviously this fight is going to go down as probably a top 3 selling fight of all time in terms of the UFC and mixed martial arts. Conor McGregor will now have lost 2 of the 3 highest selling MMA fights of all time. And then you go ahead and include the Floyd Mayweather fight. Just in general, all of these landmark events that Conor McGregor is headlining, he's losing the majority of them now at this point. That is a very bizarre thing to be remembered for.
What do you think about this? Where does Conor go from here? He was saying that the melee is taking attention off of him, and that's true.
Yeah.
But at some point, you're going to have to confront what happened here.
Yes, and he's very good at that. I think he's big picture enough to deal with it. I thought one of the suavest moves he could have pulled right there was like, hey, he could sue these guys for a lot of money, and he chose not to even press charges. This is a typical Conor McGregor thing, isn't it? To just do the thing that's kind of more like it's like he understands the mentality. You know what I'm saying? I don't think this is going to hurt him, honestly, all that badly. We'll see. I really think he'll know how to play it, though. But just to your point, man, I mean, obviously he's losing these fights too because he's taking ridiculous chances. Everybody knew that him going against his kryptonite and a guy like Nurmagomedov was maybe going to be a hard night for him. Nate Diaz taking that kind of arbitrarily at 170 pounds the first time, and then fighting him again at that just to prove a point. And then going to the boxing realm, they all kind of have asterisks until we see a guy who's kind of more within his body frame and more within his style and things like that beating him. Then I still kind of put little asterisks on each one of those,
Who's next for both guys?
That's a good question because I think we're going to see a lot of that's going to depend on the outcome of the brawl, really, because right now the Nevada State Athletic Commission is investigating basically what happened. Conor got his purse. Khabib Nurmagomedov's purse is currently being withheld. And, it's not the commission's ability to strip anybody of the belt. The belt is a made-up thing from the UFC's imagination. That really falls on the UFC. But the Nevada State Athletic Commission can certainly suspend him, and they can certainly suspend him for a long time if they want to. And I think...
Be real.
Well,
Be real.
Hold on, let me finish my thought because I think that's going to depend on how much the Nevada Athletic Commission likes money. Because if they like money, they're not going to suspend him that long. And this could easily be turned into a rematch. It would be silly, but it would be contrived. But it feels as though that's a thing that could very quickly happen and see all this footage over and over again, just like we saw with the bus. That's just how it goes in the fight game. I would like to see Khabib fight Tony Ferguson. I want that fight. I need that fight. On Friday, we actually saw both of these guys make weight on the same day. We haven't seen that ever. I just need to see that fight before both of them are out of their prime. That's what I hope is next for Khabib. For Conor, I think the Nate Diaz fight. I think that's probably the one. That's still a big fight out there for him. Obviously, maybe if Nate Diaz beats Dustin, that changes things, but I don't even think it does because I think that just makes it bigger. That'll just improve Nate Diaz's stock more. That would be my 2 preferences.
I still think we are on a collision course with Khabib and Tony Ferguson.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
It's the Blue Balls series, right? It's like the rivalry. It's like you've been waiting and waiting and waiting, but we still haven't got it. And each time it has hurt more and more because it has grown more and more. And I think at this point, they both competed on the same night. We're talking about Ferguson sitting on press row. Just how ridiculous that guy is. I mean, he's like a demon. I mean, like he's this raging spirit out there. Like you see him. The blood starts to flow, and he's smiling, and he starts throwing harder and digging in and just brawling more. It's just that kind of mentality against a guy like Nurmagomedov, who's been that dominant. It's unfathomable. I'm still wanting to see that fight very badly, so I hope that that's what they do.
Let's talk about Tony Ferguson in that co-main event if we can. Brought to tears, major tears on his knees afterwards. An incredible response emotionally. It meant a lot to him. I don't know. I haven't had a chance to sit down and talk to him to really dig into the details. It looked like he felt abandoned after his injury, either by media or by fans or other fighters or who. I don't know who, but this to him, it clearly meant a lot. He dug deep like he always does, and we'll talk about the stoppage in just a second, but talk about, if you can, what is the biggest lesson you learned about Tony Ferguson and his performance here tonight?
Yeah, I mean, even just hearing him at the post-fight press conference, you could tell it really did mean a lot to him, and that he did, like you said, he felt kind of slighted in a way, just in the way all of this has played out. Him getting back as quickly as he did from that knee injury is, frankly, I still don't even understand how that happened. And Anthony Pettis even checked him right at the beginning of that fight, giving him a couple hard leg kicks. Tony Ferguson grins and nods, and it's like, oh, okay, now this is on. And man, that was maybe one of the best 2-round fights I can remember, to be honest. The creativity, the fluidity from both of them, they were both getting loose, just smiling with each other, having fun out there in between all these bouts of violence. And Tony Ferguson survived too. Anthony Pettis dropped him hard, and Tony Ferguson was out there just doing front rolls, trying to keep it alive.
He did the Superman or the Showtime punch kick, whatever, off the fence.
Yeah. It was a classic Tony Ferguson performance. And really, man, I just hope we get this Khabib fight, because these two have been on such a collision course for such a long time. I really need to see it. That was as impressive as you could have asked for somebody coming in a spot like that.
We were talking about what this does to McGregor stock, but what about Anthony Pettis' stock? I don't think his goes down at all. He gave Tony Ferguson good work in that fight, and in the end, he had to get stopped because of a broken hand. Yeah. I got to say, Duke Rufus can do no wrong for me in terms of how that was handled. The guy had a broken hand. What could possibly be the reason to go out there? We know Anthony Pettis is tough. You're going to go out there compromised. You're just going to get beat up by a guy like Tony Ferguson, who's just marching you down. Yeah. Do you have any sense about how novel this is?
Well, I mean, we kind of wondered. I did not know about the broken hand as it was happening. You only heard about that in the aftermath. But he was getting pieced up bad in that last 20 seconds or so. I mean, Ferguson was just teeing off on him. You're kind of wondering how long he was going to last anyway. But I tell you what, man, we've seen that guy since the WEC days, and he's always a guy who I think takes it personally when another guy comes up and kind of takes that spotlight a little bit and starts to, the freelance creativity out there and just the audacity to throw crazy things. I think he gets a little bit challenged by it. He wanted to go in there and do this, and you saw him actually doing that same stuff too, and that's what makes it fun, man. I mean, these guys are just willing to take chances, even if it means getting hit. They're doing stuff that not necessarily is playing to defense and stuff like that. And I just thought that Pettis was going to be willing to accommodate him, and if you're willing to do that, man, if you hate on that kind of thing, I don't know what you're looking for in a fight, because the dude just has that kind of spirit about him. You know what I mean?
Certainly does. Let me skip 2 other fights so I can get right to another one.
Yes.
I have to, because my balls are hot. And I learned that phrase from one man who goes by the name of Derek Lewis. Derek Lewis is a national treasure. If you don't like Derek Lewis, you can just get out right now. What an unbelievable performance, first of all. Last 11 seconds. By the way, he's done that before, been like perseverant in fights where he's been hurt. He's actually much better at this as a skill than folks realize. But then to get on the mic and to give a post-fight speech, you literally cannot get in another sport. Is there any way to encapsulate what he means for the heavyweight division, what he means to the sport, and what kind of a character you think he really is?
What a moment, man. What a moment. I'm sitting there, I'm writing a tweet about something, blown away by the crazy comeback. And I look back up and somebody's like, oh, he has his pants off. It's like, what? Why does he have his pants off? My God, man, Derek Lewis is such a treasure. We are so lucky to have that, man. I can't think of somebody whose game plan is so ferociously scary in the way that it's designed, where no matter what, at any possible moment, it feels as though he's almost like to references it almost like a video game. Like he's just charging some kind of crazy power move, and then he finally falcon punches somebody. That was the biggest statistical comeback in the history of the UFC, just because I think he was down by something like 82 significant strikes or something like that. I mean, in the first round and in the second round both, he was getting messed up really, really bad. He was getting caught at the end of that jab, and he just seemed like he did not really understand how to get inside Volkov's range. And then just bam, like that. It was done in one. And how many times have we seen this now with Derek Lewis, where he just reaches back through some level of grit and just immense abilities to sustain himself in there and just save enough power for one last shot with 11 seconds left. That was genuinely one of the most jump out of your seat moments that I can remember this year. It was crazy.
He's a special guy, isn't he? He's an incredibly interesting, really special guy. You know what really sold it for me, by the way, was when he was like, "What?" Joe's like, "Why do you have your pants off?" He's like, "My balls are hot." And then Joe's like, "Oh, I understand. I understand." I was like, I don't know. I guess I understand too in a way. It was just kind of interesting. But I wondered what you can make of this. Is a guy who, what I love about fighting is that it rewards athleticism, but it rewards a lot of other character traits. Yeah. And him pounding his heart like that. He's not everything you would want out of a fighter in the sense of he's got every athletic gift, although he certainly has many. But he's got the character traits, the intangibles, oozing out of his pores.
He does 100%. I don't know what it is. I don't know if he has a flair for histrionics or something like that, but it seems like when he gets hit, he cripples over like he's done. And then a couple of incoming, the guys always pounds on him, and you think this is it. But then suddenly he buckles in and he throws some bomb back, and the guy's like, whoa, he's still in it. He's, I don't know if he's playing or if he's really hurt all these times, because if that's the case, he was hurt like 5 times in this fight. There's 5 times where I'm like, he's almost done, and then he comes back. This particular one, though, he had no business winning. He was getting pieced up the whole way through, and it was going to take a Hail Mary at the end, and for some reason, he believes in his ability to complete that Hail Mary, and he did it again, and that was one of the craziest punches right through his chin that I've seen in a long time, man. And it was crazy because I don't know how many seconds were left, like 20 or something like that, or 11. Amazing.
He's the heavyweight Doug Flutie or something. I don't even know. Who should be next for Derek Lewis? I mean, the guy's on a pretty great win streak for the most part. You look at his overall body of work the last couple of years. He's doing some good stuff. Who should he get next?
Pretty great is an understatement, man. He's now won 9 of 10 at heavyweight. 9 of 10 at heavyweight doesn't happen, really. I mean, that is such a mercurial weight division where anything can happen, as we just saw with that. Nobody wins 9 of 10. I mean, I feel like he needs a title shot at some point, right? Like, we think of him as this fun fighter, but he has really evolved himself into a top-tier, world-class heavyweight who miraculously seems to keep getting these crazy wins. Obviously, the title's tied up right now with DC and Brock Lesnar in January. I'm sure we're going to have to wait for that, and then maybe DC vacates that belt and goes back to John Jones. Who knows? Derek Lewis for Stipe, probably. That seems like the one I want to see in that case. Curtis Blaydes is obviously in there too, but Derek Lewis needs a title shot, man. 9 of 10 is no joke at heavyweight.
Certainly not. No, we got 2 more fights very quickly I want to get to. Just a couple of words if you can. Dominic Reyes looking incredible against Ovin St. Preux. I think it was good that a lucha prospect got 3 rounds. I kind of thought it was a KO. I'm not going to die on the hill if it was a KO or decision, but it is nice, would you say, to have some fresh blood that's finally breaking through at light heavyweight.
100%. You nailed it. I think that is a division for the last, 5-6 years. It used to be a glamour division in the UFC. It's finally got a guy who looks really the part to do something in that division. Because John Jones has been up there a long time. After he cleaned out kind of the oldie circuit, he's been waiting, for guys to come up. And obviously Cormier being there too. But I think that he could be the guy. And he did show me a lot. And regardless if it happened within the time frame or not, it was still a KO. I mean, he's knocked him out.
And Michelle Waterson getting a hard-fought decision, man. Felice Herrig was kind of all over her, had some good moments, but the elbows underneath and guard were tremendous. The front kicks, the side kicks, they were working the entire fight. And she's put together sort of a bit of a run, not of a run, but she's had her up and downs, but she's beating some good opposition now, much better than the kinds of performances I thought she was putting in her early UFC run. What did you make of her performance tonight, and what would you like to see her do next?
Yeah, you can tell that she's really still evolving this late in her career. Like, she's really one of the OGs, just in terms of that division, and she's been around for over a decade at this point, I believe. And I remember going into Glendale earlier this year, she had lost 2 in a row, and it really felt as though that was kind of like a make or break moment for her. And I remember when she really edged out that fight against Courtney Casey, it was a split decision. She was so emotional afterwards, like it was just a giant weight off of her back. Now 2 in a row, that kind of seems her thing. She'll lose and then she'll win 2 in a row, then she'll lose and then she'll win 2 in a row. This feels like probably her last good chance to make an actual run. She kind of referenced that too in her post-fight interview. If she's going to do it now, it's now or never. This division really feels as though there's definitive tiers in this division. I think one more good win and she could get that sort of top 5 fight, because it's pretty clear the UFC likes her. So they'd be willing to push her if she can get one more, I would imagine.
And there were other stand-up performers. Tony Martin letting people know what time it was. Scott Holtzman looking pretty good. Yana Kunitskaya got a sort of a ho-hum win, but it certainly counts in the end. Nick Lentz got a good win over Gray Maynard. Gray Maynard, I think, has some tougher questions to ask about where he can go here with his career. Last thing on this, boys, because we got to get out of here. We've been talking too long anyway. We asked in the run-up to this fight on the MMA Beat, is this the biggest night or biggest fight in MMA history? And we kind of all thought it was, if not there, pretty close. Let me ask a slightly different question. Sean, I'll go to you first. How will this night be remembered?
Well, I think this night will be remembered for 2 reasons, right? I think it will end up being the biggest night in UFC history, just statistically. I think this will probably end up being the highest selling fight in history. When that main event was starting, I turned to Chuck and I just said to him, this really does feel like the biggest moment in the history of the company. But also the brawl, man, and I think that's unfortunate for Khabib that's kind of going to be remembered as part of it, because it really could have been the moment where he became the guy and showed Conor this lesson, and instead now there's all this other additional baggage. But I think the 2 of them are always going to be intertwined now.
Why? I'm going to ask you the same question about how will be remembered, but also the brawl in Strikeforce, it didn't do Strikeforce any favors. Why do you think this one might be different? Because it sounds like you do, but again, also, how will it be remembered, all of this?
Well, that particular brawl, played out in a similar way because it was a big moment for the company. But this one is obviously a lot different. I think that it was just they were selling bad blood, and then the bad blood became a thing. It actually materialized. So I think that it will always be remembered for this brawl. I think that that's going to be the first thing that'll pop in your head. Now, depending on, especially if guys are really punished, which I doubt, we'll see how that all plays out. But if there are guys who are really punished and there's kind of long-term repercussions for what happened here, I think for sure it's going to be about that brawl. But regardless, I think the brawl will be the first thing that pops in your mind, and then maybe secondary, because some fights shrink too in history. Maybe they made the number, maybe a good number, but they don't stand as significant in terms of the competition over time. So I think it would just be the brawl ultimately that we remember.
I think we have to get out of here. So don't forget, guys, we have a lot of coverage coming your way next week. I have the MMA Hour on Monday. Please join me for that. With Sean as well as Mark, you have the A-Side live chat. That'll be Wednesday at 1 p.m. The Beat returns on Thursday at noon with this slacker as well as myself and some other special guests. So the foot stays on the gas pedal. Thank you guys so much for watching. For everyone at MMA Fighting, we appreciate it. And I guess we'll see you on the road next time.